AI is reliable when you give it enough context.
Welcome to CTOs, where CTOs share the tales and the comments. From startups to big names, innovations unfold. How many CTOs will share their stories untold?
Hello, everybody. Welcome to this week's episode of the How Many CTOs Does It Take podcast. My name is Scott Polarad, and my trusty co-host, Brad, is on vacation this week, so it's just me. And we have a really interesting guest here today, David Espindola. I think I pronounced that correctly, who is a technologist who's been in this field for decades and who has been thinking a lot and writing a lot about AI. And I'm really looking forward to talking to him today to see if he has figured out the answers to the questions that all of us are struggling with. So, David, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Scott. It's a pleasure being here with you. I'm looking forward to our conversation, and I have not figured out any of those questions yet. So.
Okay, well, let's just get stuff started off with the basics. We were just talking about this a minute ago, but I'm sure people who are listening want to know. Tell us about your background a little bit. What's your story? How did you were born at some point in the world and you're sitting on this podcast now. What happened in between?
My whole career has been in technology. So I started out as an engineer. I worked at two very fast-growing computer technology companies in Silicon Valley, one of which did an IPO. So to me, that was just a rude awakening of how powerful technology can be, and the power of entrepreneurship. And you put those two things together, and you have just an incredible combination. And after that experience, I decided that I wanted to get a big name software company on my resume, and I decided to go work for Oracle. So I worked at Oracle for 10 years. I was in their consulting business, implementing software at very large clients, Fortune 500 companies, doing ERP, CRM, all kinds of software implementations, process improvement. And in that role, I got to work with a lot of CIOs, and I decided that I wanted to become a CIO myself. So I had a boss that I worked for at Oracle. He left, he became a CIO, and he was very kind in inviting me to go work with him. He showed me the ropes, and I learned what I needed to learn to become a CIO. And when the right opportunity came along, I became the CIO of a software company. And for the last 10 years, so I then left corporate America, decided to do my own thing. I did a startup, and I'm currently focused on AI with my own company, Brainius. So that's sort of a high-level overview.
Okay, I want to ask about Brainius and your company and that, but I actually want to ask about something that you mentioned earlier in there. You said, I learned all the things I needed to be a CIO. Yeah. And that's actually, I get that question sometimes about, from people earlier in their career. Oh, Scott, what do I need to learn to be the CTO? And I'm curious to know that statement you made. Oh, I learned all the things I needed to be the CIO. What are all the things you needed to learn?
Yeah, so there's a lot that goes into becoming a CIO. I think a lot of it is around leadership. It's having some understanding of the technology, but you're not going to be the expert in all different technologies that you're going to touch. So you need to be able to have enough understanding to have intelligent conversations with the people that have the expertise across all of these technologies. You need to be obviously knowledgeable about the business aspects of the role, understand your industry, understand the business processes, and be good with strategy. So you have to have a strategic mind and be able to collaborate with the other executives around strategy. Now, in my case, I came from the world of software applications. So that's what I was good at. I understood very well what it took to run an ERP implementation project, for instance. I've done several of those. I had that experience. I have that capability. What I didn't have was the infrastructure knowledge. I had never run infrastructure before. So when I was working for my boss at that time, he gave me responsibility for infrastructure, and I learned it from experience, just basically working with other people that knew that area well, and learning how to deal with vendors, learning how to build security into everything that we did, redundancy, dealing with telecom vendors, storage vendors,
Hmm.
computer vendors. So all of that experience built up, and over time, I had that combination of the infrastructure side and the business application side,
Hmm.
and then obviously all the other leadership, communication, strategic
Hmm.
thinking kinds of skills that I needed as well.
It's so interesting that you mentioned that infrastructure piece coming from the software side, because I had the similar experience.
Mm-hmm.
And I got the infrastructure piece through luck,
Mm-hmm.
effectively. A kind of I guess what you would call a battlefield promotion. I was working at a company, I'd been there probably for about 6 years, and I'd been a software engineering manager and director, and I actually was working as a product manager for a while. And I remember very vividly the CEO came to my office. This is back when we worked in offices, of course. And she said, "Hey, so and so, who led our sort of infrastructure and IT division, we are gonna have to let him go tomorrow because he was caught stealing from the company." And I was like, "Oh, that sounds really bad." She's like, "Yeah, I was wondering if you would take his position." And I said, "Well, I was a software engineer. I don't really know how any of that stuff works. I mean, you just, no, that wouldn't really." And she's like, "Well, I really think you could do it, so and so forth." And I was like, "I don't really know. That's not really, it doesn't seem like it's my thing." And finally, I'll never forget this. She said, "Look, I need you to go to the 12th floor on Monday." She said, "Really, I'm not giving you a choice here. I need you to go fill in for this guy." And so I was thrown into it. I had no idea what I was doing. I was in so deep over my head. So you just start swimming as hard as you can, trying to
Yeah,
figure it out.
right. And when you are put in a position like that, I think most of us that come from a technical background, we usually learn things fairly quickly. And I think we have this natural ability to just be able to capture the essential fundamentals that we need to know in depth. And then the other details, it's working with the team, right? And you're going to be surrounded by a team of experts. And your role as a leader is to work with those people. You don't
Hmm.
necessarily need to know every technical detail behind every technology, right? And
Hmm.
so that's how it works.
That's exactly right. You have to learn how to sort of learn an area quickly, not every detail, and a way to, like you said, have an intelligent conversation with folks about it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, okay, so that's a key lesson. All right, well, let's switch gears. I want to hear about Brainius.
Yes.
What is Brainius?
So the idea behind Brainius is to deal with the fast changes that we are all experiencing due to AI.
Hmm.
So I started the company to leverage some of the thoughts that I had developed as I was writing and publishing my second book,
Hmm.
which is SOFO, You in the Future of Artificial Intelligence. So in that book, I try to capture in an easy to understand language all the deep changes that are about to happen, that's already happening actually, due to AI, and how transformative this technology is going to be, how it's going to impact every aspect of our lives, the future of work, society, business, everything. And so with Brainius, what I wanted to do is, how can I help people thrive in the age of AI? What are some of the things that we can do as people to be ready for this change? And that's sort of the gist behind the company. So I think of the company as there's three aspects to it. One is what I call media and education. And what I do there is I have several products and services that I provide. I do a podcast myself that I co-host with an AI. I have a newsletter. I've written the book. I have done courses and partnerships with local universities. So anything that will help people understand what AI is all about and prepare for these changes that are about to happen. The second aspect of it is advisory services. So I have done a number of projects being an advisor to U.S. government entities, to universities, to private businesses. And then the third component is the technology side of it. And that's sort of my my playground, right? My lab,
Mm-hmm.
where I play with ideas. I try to develop new things. So one of the things that I developed is my podcast co-host. I call her
Mm-hmm.
Zena. So Zena is my AI assistant. I've taught her everything that I have in terms of written documents about the work that I've done in the past. So she knows about my books. She knows about the podcast. Obviously, she co-hosts it, the newsletter, all the content that I've produced. She has been trained in all of those things. So she knows what my values are. She knows what I'm interested in. She knows the language that I use. She knows what kinds of things I talk about. And she helps me develop content. She helps me co-host the podcast. She helps me thinking about things that I want to do and challenges me. So it's sort of having an AI partner that can work with you and that you can trust. And so the trust component is really important to me, because if you don't have that trust, if you lose the trust piece, then it all falls apart. So
Mm-hmm.
I want to continue developing AI agents that you can absolutely trust.
I mean, I have so many questions, but I'll just start with where you left off. How have you built the trust into it?
Yeah. So the trust, I think a lot of it is basically providing the context. So AI
Mm-hmm.
is reliable when you give it enough context.
Mm-hmm.
So, if you go to generic chat GPT, for instance, and you ask questions, it may hallucinate. It may, provide answers that it just made up. And a lot of times it's because it's trying to please you and it's trying to give you answers and be helpful. And sometimes it seems like it, reasons that if it just gives you an answer, even if that answer is wrong, it's
Mm-hmm.
helping you, and it's not. So the key thing is to train it in a way that is useful to the system to behave. So you tell the system to ask questions. You don't take everything that I say for granted. Challenge me. Tell me when my reasoning doesn't make sense. What am I missing? Right. So
Mm-hmm.
you provide that in the instruction that you give to the AI, to the training that you give to the AI, along with all the other context that you want that AI to know. And it becomes really, really good and reliable as you provide that context.
Are you relying on one of the sort of, large language models that's out there, or have you built your own model?
Yeah, no, I have not built my own model. I leverage the models that are out there.
Yeah.
And this is something that's changing so fast, right? So
Yeah.
models are coming out every month or two. And I don't want to be tied to any single model. I
Right.
want to use the best model that's out there. The question that comes up, and something that I think a lot about, is the issue of privacy.
Mm-hmm.
To what extent are we comfortable having these AI assistants that know a lot about you in a public domain where that data can possibly be used to train the AI and may be accessible by other people? So there is this thinking behind perhaps having a local large language model right on your
Mm-hmm.
laptop, where it's concealed, it's not available to the general public. But then you have to deal with the technical difficulties of doing that. You have to deal with the challenges of training that system. You have to deal with, the constant upgrades, the changes that are coming, right? So it becomes a much bigger project than I'm willing to spend time doing right now.
Yeah.
But I think a lot about the privacy issue, and maybe something that I may invest in the future in doing something like that, but I'm not doing that right now.
Well, I think a lot, with the enterprise level, with a lot of these providers, with Anthropic or OpenAI, they claim that they're not going to use your data,
Right.
right? But they
Yeah.
have it. They still have it. It's out there.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of trust that goes in there.
Yeah. There's definitely a concern there.
The reason I asked about your own model, I've heard a few cases lately of people saying, mostly for cost reasons, they're trying to build their own smaller models for very specialized purposes.
Yeah. Yeah. And I have also had conversations with several people. In fact, there's an idea behind using a small language model, because the idea is that, these large language models, they've been trained on every subject that's out there. They may not have the depth of knowledge that you need for a particular application. So if you
Mhm.
are trying to get that AI to be very knowledgeable about your products, for instance, the generic AI is not going to know a lot about your products,
Mhm.
but you don't necessarily need that AI to know about, geography or history or physics
Right,
or
right.
whatever. You just want it to know about your product, right? So a
Yeah.
small language model, if you train it very specifically about your products, it can do a very good job, even though it doesn't have all this other knowledge. So that's another
Mhm.
possibility as well.
Okay, so you mentioned that you host the podcast with the AI. Remind me her name again.
Zena.
Zena. You host the podcast with Zena.
Yeah.
And then shortly thereafter, you mentioned that she helps you with all sorts of things, with coming up for content or with all sorts of different things. And so my next question is, when you, okay, obviously on the podcast, you're talking with her.
Yep.
When you're doing these other things, are you also talking with her? Or in those
Uh,
cases, are you typing?
Yeah, good question. I tend to type, but I talk also. So obviously on the podcast, it's all verbal. And to let you know how that came about. So I started playing around with this idea. I'd love to have an AI that knows about my work and that can be a partner working with me because, it's been trained on everything that I've been thinking about and I've been working on. And so I developed this AI and then I started having conversations with the AI. And initially the conversations were just, typing whatever
Mhm.
and then getting a response back. And then I was so impressed with what it was coming up with that I said, why don't I start recording this conversation? I mean, this is so interesting, right? And
Mhm.
it's reflecting back to me all these things that I've been thinking about and talking about and working on and researching. And it's helping me with these conversations. The conversations became very interesting. I said, I think it would make sense for me to just record this and then share with the public. And then, that's how the podcast idea came about. And I started initially, it was just me and the AI talking to each other and talking about ideas, talking about the main theme of the podcast is human AI collaboration. So I was talking
Mhm.
about several aspects of human AI collaboration. And then the next step of evolution was to bring in guests, right? So I
Mhm.
bring in guests now, and it makes it much more interesting because it's not just
Mhm.
me talking, and it's me and the guest and the AI. So it's a three-way conversation. Now, the trick here is AI is not very good at three-way conversations yet. So
Mhm.
that social aspect of AI is not quite where it needs to be at. So I have to do some manual things behind the scenes to make that work, to be very transparent here. But that's how it came about.
It's interesting you say that about the three-way conversation because we do these podcasts, we record them over Zoom or other video things. And even with humans, the three-way conversation over the video call can kind of be tricky.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
There's a bunch of social cues you get when you're in person that you just
Yeah,
don't get online.
yeah. And AI get really confused because they don't know when to interject, they don't know when to be quiet, and it gets very confusing. And I tried to do one with two AIs, me and two AIs. That was horrible. It did not work at all.
I have done a small experiment where I did get two. I was just using ChatGPT. I was got two versions of ChatGPT, not two versions, two instances talking to each other. And I told them, okay, this is the scene. I said, look, you're walking along the street and you run into an old friend that you haven't seen in a long time. And the first thing you say is, "Oh my goodness, it's so nice to see you." And I just let that conversation unfold. And it did okay for about 90 seconds, and then it kind of went off the rails. But
Uh-huh.
that was a very amateur experiment. I want to come back to Zena though. This is kind of really, I don't know what to say other than blowing my mind. Like the voice part of it to me is pretty neat. I can imagine walking into my office, having my computer or an Alexa speaker like device recognize that I've entered the room and say, "Hello, Scott," right? And I could say, "What's my next meeting?" or whatever. The notion of an audio AI, which is not revolutionary, but like a personal audio AI, is kind of, I don't know, just something you said about how you have her as your co-host on the show, and you also work with her in real life in the audio part of it it makes me see, and I'm sure I'm not the first person. I know I'm not the first person to think of it. It's just I'm personally internalizing. Wow, that is a real possibility for what within 5 years we could all have on our desks wherever we are.
Yeah. And it's just incredible how much better the voice component has become in the last 3 years. It's just, it doesn't sound robotic anymore. It is
Yeah.
very human-like. It's to the point where it's almost unrecognizable that it's an AI, and it's only going to get better, right? So it has advanced considerably, and it's just mind-blowing the quality of the audio these days.
Have you even just used Amazon's new Alexa Plus?
I have not.
So they launched their Alexa Plus, I guess, in the fall with a new, I guess, I don't know exactly the details of what's behind it, but it's basically, of course, they say it's AI powered or whatever, but the sophistication for how its voice interactions are much better. I think maybe before Alexa was very keyword focused and now it's just more natural language using an AI model, but they're doing it very generically. I wonder if maybe they're headed down that path. Okay, I had another question for you. When you talked about Brainius and the problems you're trying to solve and how you help people solve them, but you said you wrote this book about like how you thought AI was going to influence all these different aspects of life.
Mm-hmm.
To me, that's you got to know before you can understand Brainius, you got to know about what you thought in the book. I'm curious to know, and it's a whole book, so you can't ask you to read the whole thing to me now, but maybe you could just tell us what are the key things you think are going to change that maybe aren't obvious to the rest of us, or maybe are obvious to the rest of us.
I think some of it is starting to become obvious. We're starting to, so in the book, I try to give it a very optimistic long-term view of AI, because I am optimistic about AI in the long term. But in the book, I talk about this chasm, this period of time that we're going to go through before we get to the other side that I think will be very prosperous and bright. But there's going to be a lot of disruption in between. And change. So I spent my entire career dealing with technology change. And change is never easy. Change is difficult. And this is an epic change management problem that we are facing right now because of the impact that AI is going to have on jobs. It starts with jobs, right? And the way we go about doing the work that we've been doing. We're used to this industrial revolution pattern of doing work, and our education system was built for the industrial revolution and post-industrial revolution. And now everything's changing because of the capabilities of AI. So we're going to have to relearn how to work. We're going to have to relearn how to deal with these intelligent machines and interact with the machines and work with agents. As a leader, you're no longer just working with human beings. You're an orchestrator that has to learn how to work with agents and with humans and how to make the two work together. And so there is going to be some very profound impact economically, right? Because if technology starts to replace jobs, and we can, talk about how much of that is going to happen and how much may not happen, I think we're starting to see entry-level jobs that are being displaced by AI. I think anything that is algorithmic in nature, and by that I mean anything that you can perform by just following a set of instructions, particularly if it's digital, if it's something that you do in front of a computer, that job or that task is going to be exposed to automation, and it's going to happen very quickly. So, we're all going to have to reinvent ourselves, rethink about the kind of work that we do. How can we leverage the human capabilities that can't necessarily be replicated by automation, by AI, and bring that to the table to work collaborative with AI. So I think the mindset needs to change. And there's still a lot of people that are afraid of AI, that are not embracing AI. And the message that I want to send to the world is, we're not going back. This is here to stay. you need to lean in. You need to learn about AI. You need to learn how to collaborate with AI. And we'll have some disruptions along the way, but I think the end result will be very good because we'll be able to increase productivity. We are going to find cures for diseases that, we don't have today. I think we're going to be able to solve world problems like the environmental problems we're dealing with and other problems, energy, and many, many, many other problems that AI is going to help us solve. So in the long term, I think we'll have a bright future, but there will be disruptions along the way, and we're going to have to manage that change process very carefully.
Yeah, you mentioned the entry-level jobs. I think about that a lot.
Yeah.
For a few different reasons. One is just think about my industry, but as a society, if people don't get entry-level jobs, how do they work their way up to the not entry-level jobs? But
Exactly.
I also have two kids in their 20s.
Yeah.
I have kids who are 24 and 20, and I think about their future, and I have nieces and nephews and all their futures, right? Like,
Yeah.
how are they going to get their careers started in a world where there's no entry point? We
Right.
talk about entry level jobs with no entry level. What's your take on that? Both from from 2 points of view. One is like, as a society, like, how do you think we deal with that? And then, like, if you were just talking to an individual young person, how would you tell them to deal with it?
Yeah. So I think it's a difficult problem. I don't know that there is an easy answer just because of the
Mm-hmm.
way we are structured as a society. So obviously, companies are going to look at this from a economic
Mm-hmm.
view, right? But I think we need to, as we go through this change management process, this transition, I think there will be a role for humans in organizations to bring in the capabilities that we have as humans that can't be replaced by AI. So companies, organizations are going to have to take a chance on entry-level workers
Mm-hmm.
and give them exposure through a process that may not look like the process that we have today. Because today,
Mm-hmm.
you get that entry-level job, maybe you get to work on some of the tasks that more senior people don't want to work, but that's how
Mm-hmm.
you get your hands dirty. That's how you learn.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe it will change in the future where your entry level job is going to be more of a learning experience than anything else. You're just going to
Mm-hmm.
shadow somebody, or maybe, we'll have processes where you may not be contributing right away, but you are
Mm-hmm.
extending your learning and you're learning how the organization works. You're learning the business
Mm-hmm.
processes. You're learning, the different aspects of the business so that you can then be productive. So
Mm-hmm.
I think we need to be very intentional about hiring those entry level workers because, like you said, if they don't start somewhere, how are they going to do the more senior jobs? They have to
Mm-hmm.
get that basic learning somewhere, and I think companies will realize that. You can't just cut out all the entry level jobs, but maybe we're going to look at entry level jobs differently than we do today.
Yeah, we're gonna have to think of something differently and change our attitude about it.
Yeah,
Because even just in one company, right, where you maybe have a few hundred, maybe a few hundred to a few thousand employees, you need that pipeline
yeah,
because you always have people, you always have attrition for one reason or the other,
yeah,
and so you need that pipeline. And if we don't have it, I don't know how it's going to work. And then if I bring it down to a narrower level, just like software engineering, right? You get the experience to do the more complex things because you did smaller things first and made mistakes and learned and all those kinds of things. So
mm,
it's going to be a challenge that I don't think we've figured out yet.
yeah. And I think that is the key message that I think I'm trying to socialize this idea, that we're not prepared, right? We're not
Hmm.
prepared for the changes that are about to come, that are starting to come right now. That's my biggest concern is just the lack of preparation for
Hmm.
the changes that we're about to experience.
You also mentioned you thought there in the future there's a bright future of things AI helps us with. And
Yeah.
one thing you mentioned healthcare, which I think is really interesting. I've seen some stuff where the thing that stood out to me most is I read an article about how some scientists in Australia were able to use AI to detect cancer substantially, or like 5 years earlier than they could normally. And so I think there's cool opportunities there. I'm curious to know what you've seen in the environment space, if you've seen anything happening there, if in your imagination you can see how it's going to help in that space. Because we're making the environment worse with all this AI stuff, right? So like,
Yeah.
you have to figure out how to make it better too.
Yeah, yeah. So I think we will be able to come up with new materials. AI is going to help us come up with new materials. I think we'll be able to create things from scratch. So, just the ability to leverage molecular level materials and recombine them in ways that are energy efficient, that are effective, and even just discovering new sources of energy or helping us develop new energy capabilities that will diminish our need for more traditional ways of generating energy. I think AI is going to have a huge contribution from that standpoint. In agriculture, right? Agriculture today has a huge impact on the environment. And I think with AI and with new ways of thinking about food, we'll be able to do that much more, in a much more environmentally friendly manner than we do today. So these are just some of the examples that I can think off the top of my head. And I think, there will be many others, but it's hard to predict exactly what those things will be. But I'm sure, over time, we're going to be able to address most of the pressing issues that we have today.
Yeah. Well, and you touched on really the two biggest, right? Climate change and food.
Yeah.
I mean, we're going to stay cool enough, and we're going to have food for people to eat.
Right.
Water to drink.
Yeah.
That's pretty interesting. Okay, so I have one last question for you about Xena, the robot.
Yeah.
The robot AI voice. I'm curious to know about the blooper roll with Xena on the podcast, because sometimes the AI goes a little off the rails. And have you had that experience where you've realized maybe in a visceral way, like, oh, I'm not talking to a person right now because they've started going down a path and I can't seem to reel them back in. When you're typing, you just say, oh, this chat thread's all messed up. New window.
Yeah.
New chat. I better start over because I gave this thing some context or asked the question in a wrong way and it's gone down the wrong path. Because sometimes you can't get it off what it's thinking. But in voice, you don't get that option. You can't say, Xena, I need you to start over. Or maybe you can.
Yeah. So I've never had an experience recording a podcast where it completely went off the rails. And I think maybe that's just because of the way I structure it. I make it very well structured. And when I ask the questions, I preface the question with, given X, Y, and Z, what's your opinion about, A or B or C? And it stays very contained within that particular conversation. Now, where I've had problems is sometimes it speaks when it's not supposed to speak.
Yeah.
I may be, at the end, I usually thank the guest and I thank Xena for being a co-host, and she may speak on top of the guest, and those kinds of things happen all the time. But, I can manage that fairly easily. But I've never seen it actually go, in different directions where I don't want it to go. But again, I think the reason for that is just because of the structure that I have put into it and the training that I provide. Even before the guest comes on the podcast, I talk to Xena and I tell her, this is the guest we're going to have. Here's what this guest is all about. Here's what I know about the guest. These are the questions that I think we should be asking the guest. So I prep her for the event, and she's, very well prepared and ready for the conversation.
Yeah. And it was interesting. You said you framed the conversation to her. You sort of adapted, you as a human have adapted to her interface, right? Just like we adapt to a computer interface, we type, right? Or use a mouse or whatever. This is a different kind of computer with a voice interface. And we have to, they still have to some degree a structure of their interface that we have to connect with.
Yeah.
Although it's looser and looser, I suppose.
Yeah. And I think over time, this will continue to evolve. It's going to improve. But today there are some limitations. So we need to learn how to work with those limitations today. In the future, I think this is an exponential technology. It's just very difficult for us to project. We tend to think linearly, and it's very difficult for us to project how good this technology is going to get in the future. But I believe that's where we're going.
Well, so I'll finish with this question, because I was just asked this question to a candidate we were interviewing at our company. And he was earlier in his career, and he said to me, "Hey, you've been doing this for a little while. Have you seen in your career anything equally or more disruptive than AI is being right now?" And I'm curious to know your experience in your career. Is this the most disruptive thing you've seen, or is something else come along that was more disruptive?
Yeah. So, I've been through many platform transformations. I can remember back to mainframe computers, and then we had client server, architectures, and then we had web applications, and then we had mobile, and it goes on and on and on. I think what's different about this one is that the disruption is coming at a speed that I've never seen before.
Yeah.
I've never seen this velocity with, the exponential improvements that we're seeing today. So definitely a velocity that has never been experienced before in history. And I think because of our difficulty as humans to adapt to change, and when that change comes super fast, it's even harder to adapt. And I think that's where we're going to feel that disruption.
Yeah, that's exactly right. This one might be, some of those other things you mentioned might have been more disruptive to our industry, but none of them happened so fast as this is happening.
Yeah.
And it's not just the pace of innovation within the model technology, the AI technology. It's actually the adoption of it as well is happening so rapidly, which is pretty fascinating.
It is fascinating.
Well, David, thank you very much for coming on today.
Thank you, Scott.
I really appreciate it. I'm now motivated to go get myself an AI podcast co-host, see if I can crack that nut, because it seems pretty fun.
Yeah, let me know how it goes. I mean, this is something that I've been having a lot of fun doing, and it's been great. I really enjoy doing it. I keep thinking about what's the next level, right? So I think about video. I think video, it's a lot harder to work with video than it is with audio, but I'm sure that's going to be the next thing, right? Where you're going to be able to actually sit in a room like this one here, and have AI sitting there with you, talking face to face and having interactions with other AIs, with humans. It's going to be wild. So I'm looking forward to that.
Imagine if the AI, I think the next iteration actually might be just a camera. So when you sat down at your computer, the AI could see you and say, "Oh, I see you're looking a little tired today, or you're looking a little sad, or you seem happy today. What happened?" It doesn't have the visual, that sense yet, right?
Yeah. And I talk about that in the book. It's interesting that you brought that up, because that's one of the things that I talk about in the book. AI is going to be able to really detect your emotions and detect your physiology and be able to help you, especially from a learning standpoint, right? We all learn differently, and AI is going to be able to know how you learn best, what kind of learning mode are you more adaptable to, at what time of the day are you more alert and ready to receive certain kinds of information. It's going to, it's going to know you really, really well. And that can be a bit scary. And it goes back to the privacy issue. To what extent are we going to be comfortable sharing, who we are with an entity? And if we don't have that trust, it all breaks down again. So these are going to be interesting times.
Very interesting. All right. Well, thank you for coming on. Just for our audience, if they want to find you out there in the world, how can they find you?
Yeah. So the best way to find me is probably through LinkedIn. I'm fairly active on LinkedIn. Just look me up, David Espindola, Espindola. Yeah. I also have my own website, davidespindola.com and brainius.com as well.
And you got to tell us the name of the podcast.
So the podcast is called Conversations with Zena, my AI colleague.
Oh, I love it. Well, thank you very much for coming on today. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Scott. It was a pleasure.
Thanks, dude.
This episode of How Many CTOs Does It Take podcast was edited by Saffron Heftigal. Our theme song was AI generated by Brad. Please follow us on all the social media platforms at How Many CTOs Pod. You can find us on YouTube, LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, Threads, X, TikTok, and Patreon, or at our website at howmanyctospod.com. And remember to rate, review, and subscribe on the podcast platform of your choice. Thanks for listening.